Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Steven Hassan. He is a cult expert and the author of several books on the topic, including Combating Cult Mind Control, Freedom of Mind, and The Cult of Trump. His website, freedomofmind.com, has detailed information and courses that can help you learn about cults and better protect yourself and your loved ones from the tactics that they use. There will also be an affiliate link in the description to the books that I mentioned before. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate the work that you do, the work that you've done. And I've been looking forward to this for a long time, so thank you for joining me in this today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Marco.
I know you've told this story 1,000 times, both in books and in interviews that I've seen, but for people from my channel who might be new to you and what you do, can you give me the brief version of what got you introduced to the idea of cults in your life?
Yeah, sure. Why not? It's only been 47 years of telling the story. But basically, when I was 19, I was a college student at Queens College in New York City, and I was a banquet waiter at a Holiday Inn while I was a creative writing major in college. And by the way, I grew up 1.3 miles from Donald Trump in Flushing, Queens, New York. Anyway, it was an upper junior at Queens College. I had skipped 8th grade, so I entered college at age 17. So I was an upper junior. My girlfriend abruptly dumped me. She was beautiful. She was a model. I was in the dumps. I was sitting in the cafeteria, and 3 women flirted with me and asked if they could sit at my table. And they told me they were students, and they told me they were part of a youth movement that was trying to make the world a better place. And I remember asking, are you part of a religious group? Oh, no, not at all. And they turned out they were Moonies. And a lot of young people are Moonies. What are those? Well, basically, it's a political religious cult. The head was Sun Myung Moon, who claimed to be the Messiah, the sinless man. He headed a multi-billion-dollar international conglomerate. He died in 2012. His wife took over the main entity. 2 of his sons split off and started their own cult called the Rod of Iron Ministries.org. They have a gun cult, AR-15s. And anyway, I got sucked into this front group of the Moonies, and within a period of a few weeks was convinced that the end of the world was coming. We were going to be in World War III with Russia, and that God had a plan for me, that I was going to be a great leader, and we were going to create paradise on earth. Sold this beautiful vision of the ideal world. And I dropped out of college, quit my job, threw out my poetry to demonstrate my commitment to God, and became a right-wing fascist and cut off from my family and friends and everyone who tried to tell me I was in a cult and I was being brainwashed. I really, truly had a radical personality change and belief system change. And in my tale, I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night, 7 days a week, no pay. And I fell asleep at the wheel of a fundraising van in Baltimore, Maryland, and nearly died in a van crash. And that led me to be in the hospital for 2 weeks away from the group. This was 76, way before cell phones were created. So the group couldn't call me and message me every minute. And I was away sleeping and eating. And I called my sister, which I was always very close with my sister, Thea. And she said, you have a nephew, come home and visit. And I went and visited with my crutches. And I just made her promise not to tell my parents because they were satanic, because they said I was in a cult. But she did tell my parents, and they did hire some ex-Moonies to intervene. And long story short, I agreed to meet with the ex-members because I was such a fanatic. I wanted to prove I wasn't brainwashed and that I wasn't under mind control, that it wasn't a cult. And fortunately, when I was learning about Chinese communist brainwashing from the 50s and Robert J. Lifton's work, that led to my awakening, where I was like, what happened? How did I believe this stuff? And I wanted to recover, and it was a mess. I was ashamed, embarrassed, confused. Part of me wanted to go back to the group because these were my real family, and they knew the truth, and everyone else was evil. And part of me was like, Moon's a liar. He can't be the Messiah. This was bogus. So, and I started reading books on brainwashing, and I started reaching out to people like Robert Lifton to try to get some reality testing. And Robert Lifton changed my life. When we met, he said he was listening to me tell my story of the Moonies recruitment regime, the free lecture, the 3-day workshop, 7-day workshop, 21-day workshop, 40-day workshop. And he said, I just studied this secondhand, but you've lived it. They did it to you, and you did it to other people. And what you described is so much more sophisticated than what I know. You should study psychology and explain it to people like me. I'll never forget it. And I was this 22-year-old, ashamed, embarrassed, college, dropout with a cast on his leg from his toes to his groin. And this Yale psychiatrist is saying I can teach him something. And I was like, I can do that. And here I am. I became a licensed mental health counselor, written 4 books, did my doctoral dissertation on undue influence and the law, which is a critical piece that needs to get filled in to define it. And of course, I use my BITE model of authoritarian control, the behavior control, information control, thought and emotional control, to create a pseudo-identity that's dependent and obedient. And I connect the dots with trafficking law. And I add Alan Shefflin's social influence model that looks at the influencee and the influencer, or the predator or the predatory organization, and how social influence is applied and the results. So it's a formula that I think will help the planet if we can get it in the legal system used regularly.
Definitely. I have a question about that later, actually, but I'll try to segue as naturally as I can.
Sure.
In regards to your story, the thing for me that was so impactful when I first read Combating Cult Mind Control, that was the first book of yours that I read, was hearing you tell your story about the Moonies in the book, and then thinking about the experience that I had when I was 19 years old, which was also my first introduction to cults. My best friend from high school, who had been my best friend now for the past 4 years, we had been graduated, I guess, a year now. And he was always the smartest person I knew. He was always very good with numbers. So he told me that he was involved in a new business that was based in finance. And I thought, oh, of course, he was great with numbers, great at math. He'll obviously do great at that. So he didn't tell me much information, but he invited me to this meeting. And I went and I sat in this room in this very nondescript building with a lot of people in fancy attire there. And so I was underdressed and felt, of course, that these people I was among the elite in this room. And I just watched presenter after presenter go up and tell this rags to riches story about how, I was born on a dirt floor in Mexico, and thanks to this amazing company, now I drive a Lamborghini. And they had slideshows, and they didn't really talk much about the product. They talked about basic fundamental, principles of financial literacy. And did you know about compound interest? And would you rather have $1 million right now or a penny doubled every day for the next 30 days? And it's sort of this like party trick riddle where, of course, you find out that the penny doubled for 30 days is more. And it's supposed to create this air of like, oh, this guy really knows what he's talking about. And I had the feeling already that something was off, because I feel like in my family growing up, there was a lot of people who they knew how to talk. And so I felt like I could sort of smell the ruse. And so just very discreetly, as this presentation is going on, I took out my phone and I searched the name of the company. And I just get all these reviews. This is a pyramid scheme. This is a cult. This is a scam. And I thought, oh no, they got my boy. They got him. And, you know, looking back, it makes a lot of sense to me. You know, he was from a working class Mexican family. And I think that was sort of what they used to, you know, especially the one presenter saying, I was born on a dirt floor in Mexico. And I'm sure that was what he used to appeal to him. And after this meeting, you know, there's one moment in your book, Steve, where you talk about being confronted by your family and the people trying to deprogram you. And you said something to the effect of, you know, I don't care if Moon is like Hitler. I'm following him and whatever. And you talk about this sort of like, I don't know the word to describe it, like you were just taken over by that dual personality that you talk about in the books. It was the cult Steve talking.
Yeah.
And after this meeting was over and everyone's clapping and cheering and high-fiving, of course. This was, of course, a multi-level marketing company for those who
right.
Yeah. My best friend comes up to me and like I didn't even recognize him. It was the most bizarre thing. Like his face literally changed and his eyes were bulging out of his head and he goes, so when are you going to sign up? And I managed to get out of there without handing over my credit card. And later I thought I was doing the right thing. I called him. I said, hey, look, man, I looked up this company and I'm reading these things about how it's a pyramid scheme and, you know, I don't want you to get hurt. And I tried to be as delicate as I could be. And just immediately the response was, you're just like everyone else. They told me you would say that. You don't believe in me. And he literally ended our friendship, like cut me off because of that. And I thought, what the hell just happened? What is this? And I went down the rabbit hole and started learning what is multi-level marketing, what are cults, what are pyramid schemes. And it's so crazy to me that 40 years on, this was 2015 when this happened, 40 years on from your recruitment into the Moonies and experiencing similar things, this was still going on in some way. And, you know, the most common question I get asked on my YouTube channel, which I focus on talking about these MLM companies and the sort of cult brainwashing that they use and the little language games they play to, you know, in the book, you talk about inducing phobias, how they induce phobias to try to create this scarcity mindset and, you know, you need us. And the most common question I get asked is, what do I say to my friend who's in this MLM? And I obviously made that mistake myself of thinking I was just going to tell my friend, hey, man, this is a pyramid scheme. Look at this Google review. Look at this article. And obviously that wasn't the case. And, you know, I read Freedom of Mind and learned, of course, about the strategic interactive approach. And so I think the most popular question that my audience wants to know is the professional's answer to this, you know, big question of what do I say to my friend? And I know the harsh truth is that there's not just some magic phrase you can say to snap them out of it. But tell us about your experience with deprogramming people and helping families and this strategic interactive approach that you outlined in Freedom of Mind.
Mm-hmm. So what I teach in my strategic interactive approach is that you need to shift the way you communicate with your friend or your family member from just saying whatever's on your mind and being honest to being very deliberate and outcome framed or outcome oriented. And what I say that the most effective frame is empowering the person to think for themselves and make their own decision. And this is completely different than 99% or more of everybody else in the field, because they're thinking, what do I say to talk them out of it? Or what do I say that will get them out? Or it's a control frame. And what I need to explain to your listeners is that mind control is best understood as a dissociative disorder, a disorder of identity. So if you think of the real Steve Hassan and then the Mooney Steve Hassan, you need to understand that when you're talking to two of me, if I was still in the group, and you always want to be aiming the emotions and the rapport and trust building to the person's real self. And you want to be always thinking questions that are asked in a respectful, curious manner that empowers the person to think for themselves. And so it is a process to help them think for themselves. It's not a one-two punch. You just hit them with the left and then you do a right cross in the nose and knock them out. No, this is a different process. And typically people are recruited in a process, and getting out is a process. And getting out is also, you want the person to gently get out and not be traumatized either. I was very traumatized, honestly, by the approach that the people used with me because of their ignorance about the psychology of things. But if you understand, rapport and trust building is always the first stage. And if you have that, then asking a good question with respect and curiosity and being patient and waiting for a response, and then doing a follow-up and a follow-up and a follow-up. And once you get the person talking, then you can do the advanced, FOM techniques, the switch perspectives or the 3-step phobia intervention or any number of other things. But here's the critical frame that I want to share with you and your listeners. And I want to cite Adam Grant, if I may. Do you know who Adam is?
Did you mention him in one of your books?
I don't.
Okay. Then no.
Adam is a organizational psychologist. He has TED Talks. He has a very popular podcast. And he wrote a book called Think Again. And it's a brilliant book. I highly recommend that everybody read it. But in his book, he basically says that, human beings tend to get beliefs, and then they go through their life looking for things that confirm their existing beliefs. And his posture is, you want to take a learner's perspective and be open to learning new things and changing your mind if there's evidence, if there's proof, if there's science. So he opens the book with an interview he did with Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for behavioral economics for his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. He was a psychologist, and basically what he proved through his research is that humans have an unconscious mind and a conscious mind. And our unconscious mind is filled with models or scripts or heuristics so that we can quickly make decisions on what we should do about stuff. And that's called system 1 thinking. And system 2 thinking is slower, more deliberate, looking at data, looking at analyses. That's called system 2 thinking. So he's talking to Daniel Kahneman. He said, Daniel, so-and-so did research and he disproved one of your primary theories. I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but what do you have to say? And Daniel said, I'm delighted. And Adam said, how could you be delighted? You wrote this theory, it was famous, and now it's been disproven. He said, all I care about is science and helping progress the human experience. So he opens the book with that one. Oh my God, a Nobel laureate's like grateful that somebody showed that his theory was wrong on something. And he basically is presenting what we call the scientific method. And the scientific method says we have a hypothesis and then we test to see whether or not we can validate or invalidate or falsify the hypothesis. And based on data and experience, we either get rid of the hypothesis or we confirm the hypothesis. But in other words, science is always looking to grow and change, which is the complete opposite of a mind control cult, which says we have the truth. It's black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, us versus them. and just pay attention to everything that confirms what we say and ignore everything else. So what happens when you're in a mind control environment, especially if you're in it for years, is your mind gets smaller and narrower. Every year you're in, you almost feel like you're suffocating intellectually, versus like being alive and awake and like so curious to learn other paradigms that you can like expand your consciousness in, which is obviously what I advocate in my work as a therapist and as a consultant is, hey, we're human, let's grow, let's teach each other. So why I'm telling you all of this goes back to your first question. What do you say to someone in a cult? Well, if you take the frame of, hey, I'm a learner, I think I know stuff, but I'm willing to change my mind. Let's talk, let's learn, let's explore together. If something is legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. And if it isn't, I'll change my mind. I'll come and join you. How do you feel about that? Oh, yeah, me too. Okay, great. Well, let's agree to a reciprocal experience where you're teaching me what was important to you that made you believe that this group had all the answers. We'll watch the video together. We'll go to a meeting together. But the deal is that we meet and we discuss it back and forth. And then it's my turn to share a documentary or a book or whatever, and we'll discuss it. You can critique it, and we'll go back and forth until we figure out what is real and what's true. So my frame with cult members is, hey, if you can convert me to Scientology, wouldn't it help recruit a ton of people into Scientology? And they'll go, yeah. I'm like, I'm here. Let's go back in time. What was the first experience with Scientology that made you pay attention, that made you take it seriously? What about that experience? And you never invalidate someone else's experience because that was their experience. But you can offer alternative explanations for why they had that experience. And do you know what I mean when I say that? An alternative explanation?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I'll give you a quick example from combating. It was a case that I did a long time ago with a meditation guru cult of Frederick Lenz, or Zen Master Rama, who used to hypnotize his followers at telling them that they would do a meditation of listening to a tape of his meditation, that it was a hypnotic trance. And he said in that when you meet your teacher, your true teacher, you'll see a golden light emanating from their body. So when I asked this man, Jim, I said, so Jim, what was it that convinced you to dedicate your life to Rama? He said, the golden light. And I didn't say, nah, you didn't have a golden light. I said, interesting. I've met other people who talked about seeing the golden light. And I believe that Rama would talk about it in his meditation tapes, wouldn't he? Yes, he would talk. I'd say, there's something called hypnosis that can duplicate that experience where you can start hallucinating visually or auditorily things with your imagination. And he said, no, this was not hypnosis. This was a real spiritual experience. And I said, well, but there's this other body of knowledge that begs to differ with you that can replicate things. And then he did the judo move, or whatever the right word is. He said, prove it. And then I was like in deep doo-doo, because no one's ever said that to me before, that intervention. So being someone who thinks fast on my feet, I'm like, now what do I do? How do I prove it? So all I said to him is, okay, Jim, I want you to start meditating the way Rama taught you to meditate. So he closed his eyes and he started meditating. And all I said to him, and I didn't do a hypnotic voice or anything, I just was talking like this. I said, Jim, I want you to go deeper than you've ever gone before. And Jim, I don't want you to open your eyes until you're fully ready to see an even brighter golden light coming from me. And this is called a double bind. So he would be stuck with his eyes closed for eternity, or he could open his eyes and have this same experience, but brighter with me. And he did. And he was like, oh my God, that's brighter. I'm out. I'm done. Bye. And I want to call my friends. I want to get them out. It was so in his case, that was what opened him up to then learning about lifting and brainwashing and all of that. But figuring out like what was the thing that captured the person's attention that made them take this like seriously, they're going to commit their life to it.
That's an amazing story. I think I remember reading about that now that you mention it in Combating Cult Mind Control. It's very
different
funny
when I verbalize it, but
yeah.
It's I thought I would share it with your listeners.
No, that's great. That's a great clip for later. That's a great clip from this. Is there a name for this dissociative disorder for people who are in cults? I know it's in the DSM-5, it's described, but is there a shorthand for it?
I think it's gone through different iterations, but I think the latest one is dissociative disorders otherwise specified. But it's the words. It says cults, thought reform, brainwashing, coercive persuasion, disruption of identity. It's only like a big paragraph. And unlike other things listed in the DSM-5, where it gives criteria, like 7 criteria, if you have 4 out of 7, then you have it. It's just like a catch category that this exists. And that's where the future lies, is really quantifying and elucidating the nature of this phenomenon.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to bring up when you talk about strategic interactive approach and empowering people to think for themselves is it wasn't until I read the first book, Combating Cult Mind Control, that I started thinking about it in this way. Up until that point, I was trying to argue with people. Even on my channel, I would do debates with people who were in these multi-level marketing companies. And I still do these debates. However, they're for a different purpose now than they were then. Back then, a couple years ago, I was trying to argue with these people so that I could prove them wrong and then have them go, oh yeah, you're right. But then after reading your book, I realized these people didn't get into the cult because of facts and data and statistics. They got in because some confidence man in a sharply dressed, suit convinced them or preyed upon their already existing fears around, financial insecurity primarily. You talk about different types of cults. Multi-level marketing obviously is a commercial cult. Virtually everyone has money woes regardless of color or religion or whatever. So I find those are very powerful and hard to shake people from. The reason I do the debates now is not because I think I'm going to convince them. As a matter of fact, I've accepted that I'm not going to. It's sort of to just allow them to talk. And I talk about very simple things. And I allow the audience and other people who are in that same company to see that person just completely talking nonsense. Like, for example, I'll give you one thing that always comes up. Sometimes they beat me to it, actually, the word scam. I don't even have to bring it up. They'll say, people say this is a scam. But you know what the real scam is? University, college. People go get all this student debt and they never even get a job and the economy is so bad. And, it's obviously this deflection from actually talking about if their thing is a scam to just point out something else being a scam. And they use all these logical fallacies and false equivalences to try to deflect from questions. And I sort of just let it happen and let them go all over the map with these, responses so that people watching can see. Because I've got people that have reached out to me or commented on the video saying, you know, I was in this guy's downline, I was in this guy's team, but after seeing this, after seeing him unable to answer basic questions, you know, after him putting his foot in his mouth about, well, what is a business owner, and am I a business owner in this MLM company, or am I just part of someone's, like, they have been able to think for themselves by watching someone who is so deeply brainwashed speak in an environment that isn't, you know, the room full of people clapping and cheering and, you know, that mob psychology going on. So this sort of leads me into my next question, which is some of these viewers who get out of one MLM, and for the record, most of the people that I've debated have come back a couple months later or a year later and said that they're out now. But sometimes there are people who left one MLM and now they're in another one, which in my opinion, all MLMs are pyramid schemes. All MLMs are commercial cults. And I'm building up this library of videos now on my channel where I show that they all use the same, regardless of if it's skincare or insurance, they all use the same like buzzwords and phrases and false equivalences and whatever. So my question here that I wrote down is, why do cultists think everything else is a cult but their own? And why do people in MLM go from one MLM to another, sometimes 3, 4 different companies, before they realize that they're all the same thing?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. But I would tell you that people get in through a set of experiences, and it sounds like from your description, you're creating experiences for your viewers where they can see their upline in a different context. And so they're looking at it in a different context. As you say, they're not in the room where everyone's clapping and reinforcing the cult identity, etc. And you also mentioned that people get in because of money and security, but I would say a lot of people get recruited because of identity and relational issues, where I thought I was going to get a girlfriend. That was what I was interested in. I wasn't looking to make money or
good motivation.
Join a religious group, but wow, they were cute. And I thought, wow, there are 3 of them. I might get lucky with one of them. And so, you know, but so people bring their own motivation to the moment, etc. And I also can say, because I've been doing this for almost 5 decades, looking at family of origin is really important in terms of kind of what were their parents authoritarian or authoritative parents. And if they were authoritarian, they often used spanking and corporal punishment and wanted obedience, versus authoritative would use words and different ways to discipline and would do developmentally appropriate stuff. And a lot of people who get into these authoritarian groups had a narcissistic mother or father, and they never felt like they got the approval totally of their beingness. And so it becomes an issue with the recruiter and the cult now meeting you and giving you this vision of the ideal you. Often they'll say your authentic self, and they're going to give you the approval, and you're going to have all the success in the world. And money is just a small piece of that, because you get all this time with your family and your children. You can be the best parent possible. So anyway, there's a whole other piece that I'm responding to. So for me, getting someone out of a group will not prevent them from getting into another group, another group, another group. For me, it's about educating them about social psychology and about influence and what are the techniques, the Cialdini techniques. If your listeners don't know who I'm talking about, look up Robert Cialdini, Cialdini, and his 6 principles of influence. And because there's a dual identity thing, the cult identity is still there. Even if you get out, it wants to have certainty. It wants to have the structure. It wants to follow what's familiar. And so the sugarcoating can make it seem like the new group is different unless you understand the bones and you understand the structure, the control of behavior, information, thoughts, and emotion paradigm. But furthermore, and this I go into in depth in my course, I teach people when they get out of a cult to learn about all the things I just described, the psychology of mind control and Chinese communist brainwashing, etc. But then I ask them to go back in time to when they got recruited. And here's the magic sentence or the magic question that is so powerful. I asked them to imagine if they knew then what they know now, what they would say and do differently. And so what I'm trying to do is end the dissociative disorder by having the person in the present time go back to their cult pseudo self and say no to the recruiter. This is a scam. Like, I get this, that you're lying. The Rolex is fake, or it's a rented Lamborghini or whatever, that I know that most people lose money. Only 1/10% make money in a group like this. But I have them go through how they got out, how they got in, 3 major moments in between. And I teach them to counsel themselves out, basically, by imagining putting the resources in the place where they needed to have it. And that, you know, sometimes people will say, Steve, but it didn't happen that way. And I say, I know, and doing this process is not going to erase your historical memory. But what our brain can do is we can make new connections. We can take the resources and plug them where we needed the resources, and we can rewire our own brains. And I will cite Deutsch's work, The Brain That Changes Itself. And that's something that we've learned over 50 years. This became scientifically proven just a couple of decades ago, that we can have neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, and we can rewire our brains based on the here and now and being in our body. So I think I answered your questions. Did I, Marco?
Yeah, definitely. It's really my bad for not making the question more narrow, but it really is tough to sort of create nice little bite-sized tidbits when the rabbit hole goes so deep and it's so all-encompassing. You know, the bite model, someone's behavior, the information that they consume and exude, their thoughts, their emotions. It's not something that can just be summed up, but I think that definitely helped and answered the question.
But I'll also add that in my Freedom of Mind book and in combating, what I've learned is that if you say anything critical of the leader, the doctrine, or the policy, you'll just succeed in triggering the cult identity to be defensive. And the way around that is to find from the person examples that they would say are brainwashing and mind control cults. And maybe they've watched a documentary on Scientology, maybe NXIVM, maybe Jim Jones, maybe Hitler, you know, depends on the person and their background, traffickers, Chinese communist brainwashing. But to find something that they would say, yeah, that's definitely undue influence, mind control, and use those to discuss the bite model, and use those groups to describe the phenomenon of people thinking that they're the elite and they're chosen and they're special. And then when they leave, There's dispensing of existence. They're nobody. They're losers. They're going to get a job. Ooh, or get rid of those dream stealers in your life, or whatever the loaded words are, right? But the point is, and what I did for a long time, I haven't recently, but have you ever seen the exit videos of the Heaven's Gate cult members?
No, I haven't.
So do you know what Heaven's Gate was about?
Yes.
So before they agreed to take pills and have plastic bags put over their head to kill themselves, they were put in front of cameras in couples, because they were never allowed to be alone. And they were asked to give a short testimonial and a farewell. And so and this is on YouTube, you can literally watch them go, "This is the smartest decision I've ever made in my life. The world is going to be incinerated, and we're just beaming up to the spaceship." And I'm not meaning to make people smile, but this was their thing. But they would do that, and I would show it to a cult member, and I'd say, like, what do you think? Do you think they're making their own decisions? Do you think the world was incinerated in 1990? I think it was 1995, or are we here in 2023? And I have yet to have any cult members say, "Oh man, these people are so brainwashed. I can't believe they killed themselves because the leader told them to." So once you can get like feet on the floor with brainwashing exists, intelligent, educated people can be convinced to cut off from their families, change their names, change their clothing, change their language system. Bite model, get into the bite model. Tell me about your group. How is it different than this?
Absolutely.
And then you give a long silence, and you watch a little puffs of steam coming out of their ears. And that's metaphorical, of course, but it is like that when you're talking to somebody and they're starting to see the light, so to speak. It's like a little bit like that.
Yeah, I've seen it. And it's a bittersweet thing, because you're seeing somebody reclaim control over their own mind, but also lament sort of the time lost and feel kind of violated that their mind was professionally tampered with. The people that are at the tops of these MLM companies, in my experience, they've been doing it for decades, and they are professional mind hackers, professional manipulators, and gaslighters, and narcissists, and whatever other label we want to put on it that the layman could understand.
Yep. Yeah, it's painful. And I also, as a former member, I'm telling them my story and all these embarrassing things, like lying to people to recruit them and throwing my poetry out because they wanted me to demonstrate my faith in God. So I kind of set the table that there's life after cult, and, it's not all over, just to realize that it sucks, that you believed in a dream that was a false dream, and join the human race. We all make mistakes of judgment because we don't know what we don't know.
Totally. And I also appreciate you bringing up a great point, which is that it's not just one soul insecurity that a person might have that can lead to them being brainwashed, like finance. It's all encompassing. And I think that is why MLMs specifically love to target the age range that my best friend from high school was in. Just 19 years old, just graduated high school, not quite an adult yet, but not quite a kid anymore, looking for, what am I going to do after high school? Am I going to go, pursue a degree? Am I going to work? And, also the movie The Wolf of Wall Street came out in 2013. So I was in 10th grade. And throughout high school and beyond, and in these past few years that I've really gone down the MLM rabbit hole, these people worship that movie. And, it's sort of like the movie. I did an interview with Robert Fitzpatrick, who you know, and on my channel he talks about, and in his book Ponzinomics, he talks about the Gordon Gekkoism of the American identity, and greed is good. And I think Wolf of Wall Street, which is a great movie, and I love that movie, but it has been, there's been a Jordan Belfortism of the next generation, where people idolize Jordan Belfort in the movie and the real life guy who was, he was the villain in the movie. He was the bad guy. And people love to cling to the montage where it's like, they're on the private jet doing cocaine in slow motion, and Scarface, the same thing. He's in Scarface, he's making all the money. There's the montage. But people seem to shut their brains off to the last 20 minutes of both those movies where they get arrested and they go to jail and they lose their money and they ruin their reputation. And so I think that was also sort of a catalyst for the people of my generation being duped into MLM after the fact, or at least it's definitely a tool that the MLM recruiters use nowadays, and it's sort of like become this weird piece of propaganda to recruit people and to model yourself after, I guess, in a weird way. And so,
well, I think that's really interesting. I appreciate you sharing that with me, and it seems to me like there's an opportunity for you to if you haven't already done some videos emphasizing this is what actually the consequences of it, and like remember that piece. But the other thing I want to mention to you, do you know anything about the Ayn Rand cult?
No. I heard you mention Ayn Rand in an interview you did recently, but I'm not familiar with the cult.
Aynrand. She had a cult of greed and said selfishness is good and altruism is evil. And the cult used something called objectivism, but it infiltrated the United States elite, the corporate elites, etc. And it's on the level of greed is good and altruism is bad, thinking of others and the poor, as weak people, and inculcating this kind of social Darwinism nonsense that, we're wealthy, therefore we're superior to everyone else, versus we got lucky or we were born into privilege or any number of other variables. But you should definitely look that up. And I think I did at least one blog on Ayn Rand. There's a very good book about the cult of Ayn Rand. And I tried to get the author to do an interview with me, but he's like, I've moved on now. But I'm like, this is really important stuff, because this ideology is underpinning MLMs and so many other cults, frankly.
I will definitely check that out. I appreciate you recommending that.
Sure.
Winding down, my last couple questions here. In both books, actually, Freedom of Mind and Combating Cult Mind Control, you outline in great detail the influence continuum. So looking at this is the way I understand it. Looking at influence on a spectrum of, for example, the most healthy example maybe being a parent telling their child not to play in a parking lot or something like that. That's a positive, influence. And then
don't run out into the street after a ball. Right.
There you go. Yep.
This is on my website. You can download it. It's color coded for colorblind people even.
Yep.
But go on.
And on the other end of the spectrum would be like a cult leader taking advantage of their recruits.
Well, it's authoritarian mind control with the pseudo identity that you're dependent and obedient. Right. Things are fear-based, and the whole bite model is electrified.
So my question here, building on this influence continuum and bite model, is obviously the word cult. If you say something is a cult, there is a negative connotation that suggests that someone's mind is being tampered with or they're being brainwashed. Is there such a good thing as a good cult, or if it was a positive influence, like let's say a fandom of some celebrity or a musician or something, would it even be fair to call it a cult? And if so, when does a fandom morph into being a cult? Where is the line?
So I get asked that all the time, what is a cult? So I start by saying I think cults exist along a continuum. And if you're joining voluntarily, you know up front who they are, what they believe, what to expect of you. You have dues, or you have, rules of membership. fine, but they don't tell you what you can read, what you can't read. They don't sleep deprive you. They don't isolate you to ex-members or critics or former members. And if you don't want to be involved anymore, they say, good luck, stay in touch. And you're free to go without any harm or threats or harassment. But the unethical side, they put phobias in people's minds where members can't imagine being out and happy and fulfilled. Their friends all of a sudden won't talk to you anymore because you're second-class citizen, or you've fallen off the wagon, or you fell away from God or whatever. So it really varies. And I can say there are one-on-one mind control cults of somebody isolating a person from family and friends and gaslighting them, making them doubt their own perceptions and their own healthy boundaries and such. But I definitely, I mean, I say I'm in the cult of Mac book. Guy interviewed me. I said, why are you interviewing me? Because my editor made me. What's the title of your book? The Cult of Mac. I said, I'll do the interview, but I've only used Apple since 1982, and I have 4 iMacs, 3 iPads, 4 iPhones right now. I've never owned a PC. So I'm in the book called The Cult of Mac. I'm also an avid scuba diver, and I spend lots of money buying equipment and flying around the world, and because I love it so much. But nobody's making me do it. And, and it gives me a lot more than I have to pay for it.
I'm going to crack the case wide open on you having a shrine of Steve Jobs hidden somewhere in your house, Steve. I'm going to find the truth.
No, and it was before Walter Isaacson's book on Steve Jobs, and I knew that Steve Jobs was a narcissist. I didn't know that. But I was of the generation where I was like a phobic person about computers, and it was my father-in-law who bought, I think it was one of the first with the little tiny little card things. There was no memory in it, and there was no color monitor. But that taught me to start using computers because it was less scary, and I just stayed in that ecosystem.
Got it. Maybe the last question I have is, I don't think you've been asked this question before. I've watched a lot of your interviews. I've read your books, and I really wanted to hit you with a question that I don't think anyone has asked you before. So I hope this is the one. In multi-level marketing, they often utilize paid celebrity endorsements to support their businesses and convince people who are, demographics that are already fans of that celebrity to join them. I don't see this as much with religious cults. Obviously Scientology has some big names, Tom Cruise and John Travolta have been linked to that. What I want to know is it possible for me to still be a fan of someone when I find out that they have been part of a cult or promoting a cult? And the example I'll give you is recently I reacted to a video on my stream, on my channel, of Jamie Foxx, who is a very talented actor and musician, and I'm a big fan of Jamie Foxx. Him, Jennifer Lopez, Alicia Keys, and several other celebrities have all been paid spokespeople for years of an MLM company called Market America. And Market America was highlighted in the John Oliver piece about multi-level marketing.
He did a great piece, didn't he, John Oliver?
Yeah, and I think Robert actually helped work on that on that piece. And after finding out that Jamie Foxx was, a promoter of it, and there's videos online of Jamie Foxx on stage, Market America, shop.com, literally singing about it, it really hurt me as a Jamie Foxx fan. So how can I sort of reconcile my of a celebrity, but also at the same time admonish their, support of this, in my opinion, cult and scam?
You said it very well. It's exactly what I do. I mean, I love Michael Jackson. I knew he was in the JWs. I knew that he was, but when I found out he was little boys, I went through a period of not wanting to listen to his music out of support for the victims of Michael Jackson. And after a while, I was like, I can still speak out against the harm that Michael Jackson did and traumatized people and that harm, but also still enjoy his music, because music is music, or artistry is artistry. And, I love Martin Luther King. I admire him tremendously. When I found out he was cheating on his wife as a minister, I was like, or Albert Einstein was a bad father to his children. Well, he was still a genius. He still contributed, but he was a bad father. And you just have to get out of this all or nothing, black and white, us versus them mentality, and realize human beings are messy. And it doesn't mean you can't reach out to these celebrities and say, I love you, and it really breaks my heart that you're supporting a deleterious group. And, whether or not you believe in bad karma, or, that if you are doing things that's harming people, that it ultimately is going to come back at you. You can say, you need to know that there are people who are being harmed because they trusted you. And it would really go a long way for you to research this company and speak out against it and stop taking money from them.
I'm really glad to hear you give that answer, because it is refreshing to be able to hold two things that aren't contradictory, but both things can be true. I can like Jamie Foxx and also not like that he promotes Market America. And I think today, obviously you said it perfectly, there's so much black and white thinking that goes on, good, bad, good, evil. And oftentimes when people don't like one behavior of a person, they want to cancel them. And I think about, if Martin Luther King, who is a great example, if he was around today, are we going to cancel Martin Luther King and all the good he was trying to do because he was cheating on his wife? So, yeah.
Well, I'm going to just interrupt you if you don't mind. I've been good so far in not interrupting you. I'm trying not. People say, you interrupt too much, Steve.
Please, please.
I try. But I did a blog that cancel culture is wrong and bad on the left or the right. And I connect the dots with Lifton's dispensing of existence, the way you can say a person has no right to have a life if they do X. And it's like BS. Like, come on. Like,
totally.
And people can reform. Like, I make mistakes. The critical thing is, does someone point it out? And do I apologize, or do I change the wording? Somebody just recently said, Steve, you said on your podcast, that you get called the libtard by people in the cult of Trump. And I work with developmentally disabled people, and that is a slur on people with developmental disabilities. And I said, thank you for sharing that with me. And I know I just said it again, but I'm trying to explain it as a point that you can't make everybody happy, but you can also be nuanced and explain. People are calling me this bad name to cancel me. I support people with disabilities, and I'm in no way trying to add a slur on them because people are slurring me. But that's another issue, another time we can talk about information warfare and psychological warfare. But in general, you want to really stop and think, do I want to amplify the bad message by saying how terrible it is? Or do I want to just not amplify it? Or just say what I want to say and leave that out of it?
For sure. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, Steve. Really appreciate you and all the work that you have done and continue to do. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Marco. Continued success.
Thank you. All right. Till next time.